Down to the medical officers or the hospital and report it, get it on paper. Because every one of these guys will tell you that when an air raid came, you dove into a foxhole and you banged up your knees and your shoulders and everything else. But at that time, we were young and everything was fine. We'll be better tomorrow. Except that 20 to 25 years later, that shoulder, arm, elbow, knee hurts. I've got 2 knee replacements that I didn't bother talking about getting hurt, or well, we didn't have anybody to report it to anyway.
You're playing too much.
I complain too much.
No,
But that's I pray too much in that time. As far as I'm concerned, because I do write an awful lot of claims, get in and report everything that is wrong with you. I don't care if you got a pimple on your rear end, report it. Because if it's recorded and 20 years later you have a problem, it's in the record and you'll get disability for it.
Yeah, tell them about picking up people in your hospital at the time. And when your GI Bill finishes.
Oh, yeah, they're pretty good on record keeping. I had malaria in Baton and was in the hospital for a week. And later on, when I was trying to get some claim, they dug out my records and thumbing through them. And here's this slip, malaria, 104.8 slip. It was saved from the hospital and put it in powder cans and buried them. They buried all the records and then dug them up after the war. And about rank, there was rumors, I don't know for sure, about what we call private sergeants. Everybody get wiped out in your company that is in charge, so the guys that promote themselves.
When about the medical, when I got discharged, the doctor listened to my heart, looked in my ears, and discharged me. That's what happened. And I didn't know anything about disability until maybe 5 years ago.
The gentleman asked a question about the rank over there. Was there promotions going on, maybe, and things like that during the combat era? In my outfit, it was a 70% squadron, and I had to be a corporal with the rank of corporal. In fact, I got busted the day before the war and reinstated because I changed outfits. And when you changed an outfit, you had to be a staff sergeant to go in rank. Otherwise, you lost. You left everything else in the squadron. So they made it back to the corporal the next day, but the war was on. But I was also an aircraft instrument specialist, so I drawing the pay of a staff sergeant, and I got paid as a pay of a staff sergeant at 46 months back pay. A little over $5,000.
That's a lot of money there.
Well, in those days before the war, you got rated with your job, AM first class or AM second class. At second class, you do the same pay as a staff sergeant. You could be a private, but you do the same pay as a staff sergeant. And if you're AM first class, you got the same pay as a tech sergeant. Well, they done away with that during the war, so I went from corporal to tech sergeant during the war. And when I was liberated, and then when I re-enlisted, they made me master sergeant.
When you first received an invitation by the Japanese government to come over here to share your experience to 21st century Japanese, what was your reaction? Did you question the motives of Japanese government or?
My first thoughts was what after 70 years was it going to do good to
come back to Japan. After all that time of wait, nothing had been done or said, to all at once become invited by the Japanese embassy was kind of a puzzle of why it happened.
Well, I have maybe a little different experience. I had a Japanese guard I was assigned to when I got hurt in the mines at Kamioka. And we became tomodachis, so to speak, indirectly. We worked together and we established a new language. And even at for Toshidama, he gave me an 8 one time. That was quite an outstanding feat at the time. Okay, can you hear me? Oh, and towards the end of the war, he lived locally at Kamioka. His family had a milk farm, he called it. And he would take out like 100 prisoners at a time to dig for roots. And then we come back and boil them up. Everybody was kind of starving on that thing. So after the war, I made a contact to the government, to the mayor of Kamioka, and we started writing correspondence, and the minister went up to check him out, and they thought it was fine. They were going to have a big party for him. They thought I was coming, and the minister didn't ring, so he was things were a little disappointing for that night. So, making a short story of this thing later, I just couldn't go back. I got close to it a couple of times. I made a telephone call, but that was as far as I could do it. So we picked up a student one time, a Japanese student. They asked if we'd have her for 2 weeks. And I said, I'll love her or kill her. Well, she was a sweet little thing at 16 years old, and we fell in love with her. And we became her American father and her mother while she was there. Well, when she left, I went over to the hospital, and I knew she was going to write in script, which I couldn't read. So I saw a gal and I said, that's a Japanese gal. So I asked her if she Anashimasu or something like that. And she attested that she did, and she'd be glad to help me. So she gave me her name, rank, and serial number, and I went home and I showed it to my wife, and I said, wow. So I called her back, and I said, my wife, and I'd like to take you to lunch. So we go to lunch, and we became acquainted, and we find out her husband was a VP for Sony, which was a good start. Then we developed this a little bit further, and we made arrangement to go back to Kamioka. And we got the mayor of San Diego involved, and they sent a Toshidama and a proclamation, and then our senator flagged that flew over the American Capitol, and we went back, and I think we had like 17 different reporters, etc., covering our story. And we went to the mines. It didn't go down. We just went in the door. And the mine company put a nice lunch on for us. And the school established a program with 3 songs in English. And they flew the American flag over the school, I guess you call it the main municipal building or whatever they refer to it as. It was quite thrilling. And we still maintain contact with those people.
I went to a meeting of an organization called ABDC, American Defenders of Baton and Corregidor, in Phoenix 5 years ago. And I saw this beautiful young Japanese woman. And I asked somebody, who's that? And they said, that's Kenaway. Well, who's Kenaway? And I said something, probably I shouldn't have, like, you're a very beautiful young woman. And we started talking, and after that I met another young Japanese lady named Yoko. And a couple more just recently named Shizu and Fuyoko. And what I'm saying here is don't underestimate the power of women. Because when I started all that, I didn't know what my feelings were about the Japanese. And I didn't bother to try to articulate it. You know, history is history. Everything has its place. Lit, sleeping, dogs, light. And so I didn't have any feelings about it. But jumping ahead to this trip, when it was offered, I said, yes, of course I'd like to go. And as soon as I hung up the phone, I said, what in the hell did I do that for? Why would I want to go back there? And every morning I'd wake up and say, I made a big mistake. I have to call this Tenny and cancel this. And then by nightfall, I would have talked to one or two members of my family, and they'd say, are you crazy? Go. This is an opportunity of a lifetime. So they presented their point of view in contrast to mine. And so every morning, I woke up not wanting to go, and every night, I was gung ho.
Next question.
Okay. Thank you for your service. I recently read the book by Laura Hillenbrand. I recently read the book Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand about Louis Zamperini. I wonder if any of you would like to comment on that book.
I will comment. I will not let my father read it. He lives alone. He does live right next door to me, but he does live alone. And there's another book, Escape from Davao, and Dad was in Davao with Eddie Dias, who escaped. But Dad started reading that while we were traveling, and he started having nightmares. And even though we were at my brother's house and he was in the bedroom next door, I could hear the yelling or the tearing of the sheets and the moving. And so as a child, Dad now says that he used to give me orders when I was a child, and now he says I'm giving him orders. He has orders not to read those books because he will be on the floor the next morning, or the nightmares just don't. So he dwells on the happiness rather than that. So
What are the books about?
he was Unbroken is about Louis Zamperini, who was a Olympic runner in the 1940s, and he later became a pilot and was flying a mission over the Pacific Ocean, and his plane went down and was captured. And it tells about his experiences
in POW.
POW camp. One of the same Japanese soldiers that was mentioned in Unbroken, the one-armed bandit, was also at Dad's camp at a later time. But but yeah, as a child, I will answer that one.
And what she says, I do.
Before I forget, I want to mention a website that is invaluable about our organization, which is now defunct because we're too old. The ADBC has been taken over by descendants. And they're doing a wonderful job of keeping it going. We have a meeting once a year. I need to mention a website called Tragedy of Bataan. And that will give you the details of a film that's coming out, and it was made by one of our associates named Jan Thompson. This will be on the air on PBS coming up quite soon. I can't give you a date because that will vary with the area in the PBS station. But that will have a short film, it will have 5 public radio spots, and then finally a 2-hour film about our experiences. And there will be 15 of us being interviewed on air. And I recommend that very highly. Jan Thompson's father was a prisoner of war in the Navy right off Corregidor. So in honor of her father, she went to one of these meetings about 1992, and she said, I've got to do something to honor my father. And so she's poured her heart and her bank account into these films for the last, I don't know how many years. She's a wonderful young lady. She teaches at the University of Southern Illinois. But again, the website is Tragedy of Bataan, and if you get into that, you'll get to see all kinds of it. And you'll see my picture when I was 16.
Tell who's the monitor of that?
Alec Baldwin
Yeah.
is the narrator.
Yeah, Alec Baldwin is the narrator.
Next question.
How do you feel about the fact that you were able to live and some of your friends died when you were a prisoner of war?
That is very, very difficult. I caught the last hell ship out of Manila, August 25, 1944. Every ship that left after that, as far as I know, and as far as I can tell by research, was hit. And I just, for many years, would say, why me? I had survivor guilt, big time. But I'll tell you something, it's better to be a survivor than not be.
Sato-san? Well, next, you and next episode.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your efforts to tell us about your experiences in Japan. And that's one thing I perhaps would like to hear a little bit more about. For many of us, we grew up watching World War II movies that primarily focused on the European theater. They were the classic prisoner of war movies, the Hogan's Heroes, those type of things. So for Americans, we have a lot of imagery of what life might have been like in those situations, but again, only in the European theater. And I was curious, living in Japan and in Manchuria, the actual experiences in the camp in terms of like, you know, where did you live, how did you eat, the daily life. Many of us are very curious to reconcile our experiences. Sorry, I'm emotional. Our experiences here in Japan, I currently live here, with your experiences there. And we'd sort of like to have perhaps more of a feel or a flavor of what it was like for you at that time.
Well, give you a little flavor.
Closer to you.
Yeah, we got to Manchuria, and we were out of the Philippines, in Busan, Korea, and it was snowing on the dock. And most of them were in shorts, barefooted. So they gave us some pretty heavy clothes to put on. When I bent over, my butt was showing, and the late of them got into the calves of my legs, so I didn't get much coverage. Then we went on this train ride up to Manchuria and went to these underground or summer encampment that they put us in, 90 men to a barracks, and we were all made of sod on the side. And we were there, they gave us 5 blankets and 1 sheet. Some people say we got 2 sheets, that's a controversial question. And we all, literally we slept together. Within about a month and a half, it was 40 below zero. And we walked 5 miles to work and 5 miles back for the first year. It was a living hell in that type of work. And our food supply was very limited. And we got a bowl of cornmeal mush, starting with at the factory. They made that contribution. And they wanted to do an expert job. They say I was a machinist, I told them a grinding specialist. I'd been a screwdriver in high school, so I was pretty well qualified. And I saw the people making cement by hand, and I decided that I I can make any machine work, and I did. I was one jump ahead until I got into trouble, and we did a lot of sabotage type things, cut off the oil supplies and buried parts in the cement and so on. Eventually they caught up with us, and that's when I got shipped out. That answers your part of your... But then I think it was 6 months before we had our first bath. No soap. I don't remember ever getting any soap. No soap. So the first bath is kind of interesting. You wouldn't get your chow, what little it was, until you took a bath. So they had it chipped. And you had to go down into the bathhouse and show that get the chit stamped or whatever they did to it. So it was 25 below zero, I think. So I went down, and you had to slide over the ice to get in where this hot water was coming out, a circle. And I took off all my clothes, and of course were infested like crazy. And scrubbed the best I could with no soap. And then I got out with no towel, because they wanted to push you out, and you were standing on about 8 inches of ice. I got dressed, out the door, and the time I got back to the barracks, my head was coated with ice. All my hair was frozen. So those were the kind of conditions, and I don't know when we washed clothes, months at a time. And we'd sit there and talk to each other, picking lice over each other. That was a hell of, all the time. That was a constant thing. Never did get rid of it. And then the fleas would come, and the other types of critters would come up there. So you would just sit there and talk to each other and pop lice. It's a way of life. Did that answer your question?
Those lice that he was talking about, they live in the seams of your clothes, and they live off your body. And we call them seam squirrels.
About food in camp number 1, all the latrines were open latrines, and there was a fly problem. And when we did get food, which amounted to maybe a canteen of rice a day, a canteen cup, I should say, of rice a day, you ate it like this here. But the disease was so bad because of where these flies were coming from, they decided they were going to give us a treat. For every can of flies that we would turn in, they would give us a cup of rice. Needless to say, in a week, all the flies were gone. But there was a tremendous amount of men that died because of the diseases that come out of those latrines. As far as in prison camps in Japan here, we got a bento box of rice to go to work with. That bento box, for those who don't know, is actually a cigar box. And it was filled with rice, and they give us a few daikon occasionally. And that's what we went to work with. When we come back out of work, maybe 10, 11, 12 hours later, we went to the mess hall, and somebody asked a question here about men dying and how did we feel about it. When you are a prisoner of war, the only thought that you have is how to live, and not about the next guy. I was fortunate in that I quit smoking, and but for a purpose. We used to make 10 cents a day, but they used to charge us 20 cents for a pack of cigarettes, of which these were Japanese cigarettes. It was 10 in a package. A lot of the guys couldn't quit smoking. So when we went to the mess hall, they'd sit down to eat a cup of rice or whatever they were going to give us that day, and yell out, pack of cigarettes for a bowl of rice, pack of cigarettes for a bowl of rice. And you could get 2 or 3 takers. This got so bad with the men that they finally had to have what they call a bankrupt corner, because some of these men had given or sold their food for as much as a month ahead. They had no food coming in. They owed it all out. Now, I'm not proud of it, but I'm alive, because every meal I had at least 2 to 3 bowls of rice coming in, and maybe a bowl or 2 of soup. And I lived because I sold those cigarettes. Then I would trade the rice, and I would trade the soup, until I had at least 2 or 3 meals coming in every day.
You were a banker.
But the fact remains that, and I'm not proud of it, I'm sure that there's a lot of guys that I starved to death. But when you're in prison camp, there's only one guy, and that's you. And it's the same thing that I have to preach today, believe it or not, in the VA, because I have some of these guys that'll come in and they want to write a claim, but they don't want to put everything in it, because he needs it worse than me. And I say, what do you mean he needs it worse than you? Who's more important than you? You have a wife, you have children. Who's more important, that guy or you? It's an unfortunate lesson that I learned, and I'm still number 1. Except I've got number 2 over here who keeps me going.
One thing we didn't talk about was prisoners could get time off if they were injured on the job. And if you didn't get it naturally, you might arrange to have an injury. And a little cottage industry grew up around that, because some guys would take a sake bottle and break your arm for 3 cigarettes. That way you could get some time off. When I went to the VA to file a claim, these people were very savvy. And they said, "Did you ever try to injure yourself?" And I said, "Yes, I did. Because I had the flu and I couldn't get any time off. And I stuck my foot under a tram car loaded with oil and tried to crush it. Fortunately, they'd given me British Army boots, which had a steel toe. And the angle was perfect, and it bounced off. I got a hell of a bruise, but I got 2 days off.
We have time for one brief question. So, Sato-san, you raise your hand. Or we'll take 2, just ask your questions together and then they'll answer them. So, briefly.
Very,
we have to end in a few minutes.
Terrible question. Have you ever thought about the suicide yourself during the imprisonment?
I'm sorry. I know the gentleman said a brief question, but I had planned for a question with an anecdote, which I know is everybody's least favorite kind of question. But if you'll be gracious and bear with me.
Just a little short, because we really have to end in a few minutes. Okay, so.
A friend of mine, whose grandfather, named Thurmond, was also in the Army Air Corps and was also shot down and held prisoner by the Japanese. Yes, actually a relative. When I went to visit my friend and his family, I knew about this story beforehand, and the friend's mother shook him and said, Dad, ask her what she studies. And I said, oh my God, I'm going to get an earful from this man about how I'm a traitor to my country, or I don't know what else about what these people did to him. And he just smiled and he said, you know, every morning the guard would say to me, Ohio. And I guess if I have a question, it's what, if any, small moments of humanity did you notice in your time, or did you maintain in your time where really no humanity is I guess, possible or imaginable? That's all. Thank you.
So that was the last question.
Humanity.
What?
Yes, tell them about the Cobra. The guard that the humanity. Yes.
I had a guard at DeVal Penal Colony that he kind of liked me, I guess. But anyway, he gave me the heart of a cobra. Says, if you eat this, you'll have a long life. And I think he's right. I'm 91, and my goal is to see my great-grandson, 6 years old, play football in high school. I'm going to make it.
Yes, you will.
If any of you want to give a concluding word? Well, thank you very much. We're extremely grateful to you. This has been an amazing event, and we know also to be extremely busy today, so we all want to thank you so much for doing this. So thank you again.